friends, Pastor Josh Blevins here, and I want to take 5 minutes of your time to talk about two words that many people avoid mentioning in the same sentence: faith and politics. For far too long in our country, we've been conditioned to believe that those two realms cannot be intertwined. Now, I want to say it's certainly been true that throughout history, an unhealthy mingling of those two things has led to societal damage. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to tackle these issues biblically and as thoughtfully as we can as Christians. Think about it. On one side of the spectrum, you have people whose hearts are so rooted in the things of the world that they end up putting their hopes and their dreams in politicians or political victories. And they use Jesus as sort of a political cover for their identity in politics. It becomes clear over time that their love and loyalty to country outweighs their love and loyalty to Christ and his kingdom. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who in the name of the gospel have abandoned the public sphere altogether. They talk about keeping the main thing, but ultimately they're using Jesus as a cover for their cowardice or unwillingness to be a light in the world and to convey the savory saltiness of God's truth and righteousness in a culture that needs it and opposes it. In between these two realities is a biblical balance that all Christians must strive to strike. We know that the greatest commandments of the entire law and prophets, according to Jesus, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as you love yourself. And this is something that every Christian should agree on. So we must ask ourselves, can I effectively love God and love my neighbor by being engaged and involved in the political process, or being faithful to vote within my nation, state, city, or community that God has placed me in? I believe the answer to this question is a resounding yes. After all, as Christians, we don't compartmentalize our faith. It's my faith that informs and directs my relationships, my job decisions, how I manage my finances, how I love my neighbor in practical ways, how I preach the gospel or help the homeless. Then it certainly should be that same faith that informs and directs how I use my voice and I vote to shape the policies and laws that directly affect the lives of the people that I have been called to love. You see, laws and political agendas and even party platforms, they all work together toward creating standards within my society, and these standards affect everyone. So what are the top questions Christians should be asking themselves and wrestling with as they go to the polls? First, we need to remind ourselves that our salvation and eternal hope does not rest in a political party or candidate, right? Jesus is not a Republican or a Democrat. He's a monarch. He is the king over all the universe. You see, voting and political involvement are merely avenues for the Christian to express the truth, the righteousness, and the love of God in practical ways within our community. But we must always remember to keep our eyes fixed on the things that are eternal and to not place our hope or our joys in winning political battles. Second, however, the Christian must also remember that Jesus will hold them accountable for their stewardship over everything that was entrusted to their care. This includes their society and their culture. As Americans, we live in a unique country that has granted us the right to have a say in the kind of people and the kind of laws that rule supreme in our land. If every Christian viewed those rights as a stewardship from God, there would be societal ills and injustices that would literally be overturned for the good of people and the glory of God. As Christians, we want to steward our money well, our time well, our ministry well, and our culture well. This means a Christian cannot separate their faith from their political preferences or convictions. Not only must we engage in a political arena, but we must do so being informed by the unchanging truth of God's word. We must look at the left and look at the right and say, I'm speaking the truth. And finally, this leads us to the question of what issues Christians should ultimately take a stand on and fight for within their culture. Hey, you and I can have legitimate debates all day long about how money should be invested in infrastructure development. But there are certain biblical issues that have clear biblical mandates and implications that are not optional for the Christian. Followers of a life-giving God must be committed to protecting the lives of innocent human beings, especially those most vulnerable among us, the unborn. Also, the Bible does not look favorably upon nations that have historically embraced sexual immorality, confusing human beings who are image bearers of God regarding their God-given sexuality. Additionally, it's very clear that God cares for those who are in legitimate poverty and need. You see, God has called us each as individuals and as church organizations to take action in each of those arenas. Remember, political involvement can never be an excuse to abdicate our personal responsibility as Christians or our corporate responsibility as the church to serve the needs of those around us. But we must ask ourselves, if I'm going to vote for a candidate or a party or a law, what would I be supporting that might be outside of what pleases God? Or what would I be promoting that potentially breaks God's heart? You see, Christians have no business supporting candidates or parties that publicly and pridefully support the acts of abortion or the perversion of human sexuality. Therefore, we must be convinced before God that we are doing our best within an imperfect system alongside of sinful candidates to honor God, to honor life, and to honor other human beings. In this broken world, there are no perfect answers or solutions within politics. The answer has always been and will always be Jesus. But the Bible is clear that when the righteous rule, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. So consider this carefully and prayerfully and ask the Lord how He might have you love those around you by stewarding your vote or your political involvement well. God bless you guys.